The winter I am about to tell you about did not arrive with noise. It came quietly, like a verdict already decided. Snow fell in patient sheets across the outskirts of town, smoothing the roads into pale ribbons and muting even the restless dogs behind wooden fences. On the shoulder of Route 17, where the wind had no mercy and no witness, a cardboard box trembled against a mile marker crusted in ice. Inside, a German shepherd puppy no larger than a bundle of firewood lay folded into himself. His fur, meant to grow thick and proud one day, was still soft and uncertain, clotted with frost along the edges. He did not cry at first. He simply waited. Perhaps he believed the engine he had heard fading into the distance would return. Perhaps he had not yet learned that sometimes footsteps walk away and do not look back. When the cold finally bit too deep, a thin whimper rose from him, fragile as breath against glass. It disappeared quickly into the wind. At the edge of town, Rowan Vale walked the same road he had walked every morning since returning from the Navy. He rose before dawn because sleep no longer trusted him, and he trusted it even less. His boots moved with steady discipline, but there was something restrained in him, as though he were forever bracing for a command that would not come. Beside him trotted Kestrel, his retired military dog, older now but still carrying himself with alert dignity. The Malinois ears caught sounds Rowan had trained himself to ignore. People said things about Rowan in low voices. They said war had taken more from him than it had given back. They said he preferred dogs because dogs did not ask questions. Sheriff Calder Boone had once told him, not unkindly, that isolation could curdle into something dangerous if left unattended. Rowan had nodded without agreeing. He had learned to nod at many things. That morning, the air felt different, sharp enough to split bone. Rowan adjusted the scarf at his throat and kept his gaze on the snow-polished road. Kestrel halted so suddenly that the leash snapped taut. Rowan paused. "What is it?" His voice came out gravelly from disuse. Kestrel did not bark. He simply listened, head angled, body still except for the faint tremor of anticipation. At first Rowan heard nothing but the wind dragging itself across open fields. Then, faint and irregular, came a sound so small it seemed imaginary. A broken note, a plea that barely survived its own making. Rowan followed Kestrel toward the roadside ditch. The cardboard box lay half buried, one corner crushed under ice. He stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, as though understanding what it might contain required permission he did not wish to grant. The sound came again. Kestrel moved forward, nudging the box with his nose, careful but urgent. Rowan crouched. The cold seeped through his jeans instantly, but he did not notice. He brushed snow aside and peeled back the flaps. Two dark eyes, rimmed in frost, blinked up at him. They did not accuse. They did not beg. They simply existed, as though astonished to find someone still there. For a heartbeat, Rowan felt something tighten in his chest, something dangerously close to recognition. He had told himself he would not bring home anything fragile again. Fragile things demanded more than he believed he had left to give. Yet Kestrel lowered himself beside the box, pressing his flank against the shivering puppy as if forming a barricade against the wind. Rowan exhaled slowly. "You don't get to choose this," he murmured, though he could not tell whether he spoke to the dog or to himself. He removed his gloves. His fingers stung as they touched the puppy's fur, ice melting instantly against the warmth of his skin. The small body fit into his palms like a secret. The puppy's heartbeat fluttered erratically, but it was there. It was stubborn. Rowan slid off his scarf and wrapped it around the trembling bundle. Without ceremony, without announcement, he lifted the box and stood. The walk back to his cabin felt longer than usual. Snow thickened around his boots, and the wind pushed against him as though testing his resolve. Kestrel kept close, glancing up at Rowan with a gaze that held neither doubt nor question, only expectation. Inside the cabin, Rowan moved with practiced efficiency. He set the box near the fireplace and stoked the flames higher. He found an old wool blanket and folded it twice before laying the puppy upon it. Kestrel lay down immediately, encircling the smaller body with his own warmth. The puppy did not open his eyes again, but his breathing steadied by degrees. Rowan knelt there, watching the rise and fall of that fragile chest. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp wool. Outside, wind scraped along the walls like a persistent memory. He fetched a bowl of lukewarm water and dipped his fingers into it, moistening the puppy's muzzle. A faint lick touched his knuckle. He almost laughed. It startled him. That impulse. He had not laughed in months. Hours passed in slow vigil. Rowan did not sit in his usual chair. He remained on the floor, back against the couch, one hand resting lightly near the puppy, as though proximity alone could anchor life in place. Every so often, Kestrel would shift, adjusting his position to ensure no draft reached the smaller dog. As the fire crackled, Rowan's gaze drifted toward the window, where snow layered itself without exhaustion. He remembered another night, another cold that had nothing to do with weather. He remembered holding a radio, waiting for a voice that never returned. The silence then had felt identical to this one. Thick, suffocating, final. The puppy stirred, interrupting the memory. Rowan leaned forward. "Stay," he whispered, unsure whether he was issuing a command or making a request. The puppy's eyes opened again, clearer now. They were not fearful. They were searching. "You're not mine," Rowan said quietly, though his hand remained steady against the blanket. "You were someone else's responsibility." Kestrel huffed softly, as if dismissing the argument. Night descended fully before Rowan realized he had not eaten. The world outside disappeared into white obscurity. Inside, the firelight painted the walls amber, turning the cabin into something gentler than it had been in years. When at last Rowan rose to prepare a thin broth, the puppy attempted to lift his head. It wobbled, then fell back, but the effort itself felt monumental. Rowan crouched again and allowed the small body to lean against his palm while he fed it drops from spoon. "You're stubborn," he observed. "That might save you." Kestrel watched closely, tail thumping once against the floorboards. By midnight, the puppy's trembling had lessened. Rowan carried him carefully to a padded crate near the hearth, though Kestrel refused to leave his side. The older dog settled beside the crate, chin resting near the opening, guarding without instruction. Rowan stood for a long moment, unsure why the sight unsettled him. Perhaps because loyalty, when offered freely, felt undeserved. He turned off the lanterns, leaving only the fire's glow. As he moved toward his bedroom, a soft whimper followed him. He paused. The sound was no longer desperate, it was questioning. Rowan hesitated only a second before retrieving the crate and placing it beside his bed. "I won't promise anything," he muttered into the darkness. "Just the night." The wind battered the cabin until dawn, but inside there was warmth, steady and deliberate. At some point, Rowan's hand drifted down the side of the mattress, resting against the crate's wooden frame. On the other side, a tiny body shifted closer. Morning arrived pale and tentative. Rowan woke to silence, so complete it frightened him. He sat up quickly and peered into the crate. Two dark eyes blinked back, alert now. The puppy struggled upright on unsteady legs and, after a brief calculation, licked Rowan's fingers. Relief moved through him, like thawing ice. Kestrel approached, sniffing the smaller dog with solemn approval. The puppy attempted a clumsy bow in response, nearly toppling over. Rowan found himself smiling fully this time, the expression unfamiliar but not unwelcome. "You'll need a name," he said, voice softer than it had been in years. Outside, the storm had reshaped the world. Fences vanished beneath drifts. Roads were indistinguishable from fields. Everything looked newly made and terribly vulnerable. Rowan stepped onto the porch with the puppy bundled against his chest. The air still carried a biting edge, but sunlight fractured across the snow in shards of brilliance. Kestrel stood at his side, vigilant as ever. The puppy squinted at the brightness, then pressed closer into Rowan's coat. "Frost," Rowan murmured after a moment. "You survived the cold. That should count for something." He did not notice that he had spoken in certainty rather than doubt. From the road below, a truck engine rumbled faintly. Someone would eventually ask questions. Someone would decide whether a man like Rowan deserved another life, depending on him. The town had never been generous with second chances. But for now, the porch held only 3 figures against a white horizon, one scarred, one aging, one newly breathing. Rowan adjusted his grip, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath his palm. "Just the day, then," he said quietly, as if negotiating with fate itself. Frost's tail gave the smallest, determined wag. Winter did not loosen its grip after that morning. It merely shifted its weight. Frost grew stronger by increments so subtle they might have been missed by anyone less watchful than Rowan. Each day the puppy managed a steadier step across the cabin floor. Each night he slept closer to the bed rather than inside the crate, as though instinct had already chosen his place. Kestrel assumed the role of quiet instructor without ceremony. He corrected with a nudge, rewarded with stillness, and demonstrated patience as if it were a discipline learned long before Rowan ever held a rifle. Frost followed him constantly, mimicking his posture, studying the tilt of his ears, attempting dignity with oversized paws that betrayed him at every turn. Rowan observed more than he interfered. He repaired fences by day and chopped wood with renewed purpose, conscious now of two sets of eyes, tracking his movements from the porch. He spoke sparingly, yet more than before. Not conversations, never that, but fragments. Stay, easy, you're safe. The words felt foreign at first, like tools unused and rusted, yet they began to fit in his mouth. The town, however, did not forget so easily. News of the abandoned puppy had traveled faster than the thawing river. At the general store, Mrs. Dalloway Pierce lowered her voice just enough to ensure it carried. A man who keeps to himself shouldn't keep responsibilities he can't explain, she remarked to no one in particular. Rowan heard it while measuring feed. He did not respond, but his jaw tightened. Frost sat at his heel, glancing up as if sensing the shift in air. Kestrel remained motionless, eyes forward, embodying restraint. Sheriff Calder Boone approached Rowan outside beneath the sagging awning. Snow dripped steadily from its edge, striking the ground in slow punctuation. "People are talking," Boone said, not unkindly. "They wonder if you're equipped for sudden attachments." Rowan met his gaze. He was left to die. "That's not the point." "It is to him." The sheriff studied Frost, who attempted a dignified sit and wobbled slightly before correcting himself. Something unreadable flickered across Boone's face. "Just make sure you're not rescuing him to avoid rescuing yourself," he said quietly before walking away. The remark lingered long after Rowan returned home. That evening, as Frost crept up the window panes, he found himself staring into the fire while Frost gnawed contentedly on a scrap of rope. Kestrel lay stretched nearby, his breathing deeper than it once had been. "Rescuing yourself," Rowan repeated under his breath. The words felt accusatory. A soft knock interrupted the thought. Iloan Hart stood on the porch, her scarf dusted with snow, a thermos cradled in her gloved hands. She offered a tentative smile that seemed as fragile as the season itself. "I brought stew," she said. "The roads are bad, and I assumed you wouldn't drive into town." Rowan hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. Frost approached her with cautious curiosity, sniffing the hem of her coat. She knelt without hesitation, allowing him to investigate. Her hands were gentle, deliberate, neither pitying nor fearful. "He's braver than he looks," she observed. "He doesn't know what fear means yet," Rowan replied. "Or maybe he does and chooses to move anyway." The distinction unsettled him. Iloan stayed only long enough to warm her hands and leave the thermos. Yet in that brief span, something shifted. She did not ask about Rowan's past. She did not offer consolation disguised as kindness. She spoke instead about small things, the library roof leaking, the way children had begun asking for books about winter animals since the storm. When she rose to leave, Frost followed her to the door and watched until she disappeared beyond the white veil. Rowan felt the absence more acutely than he expected. Days lengthened by minutes, though the cold remained relentless. Frost's training progressed under Kestrel's watchful eye. Sit became steadier. Stay became possible. Recall, when Rowan called his name, became immediate and earnest, as though the puppy feared the sound might vanish if not answered. One afternoon, as wind rattled the shutters, Rowan noticed Kestrel struggling to rise from the floor. The older dog managed it, but the effort lingered in his muscles longer than before. Rowan knelt beside him, hand resting on the graying fur. "You don't have to prove anything," he murmured. Kestrel's eyes, still sharp, held his for a quiet moment before shifting toward Frost, who bounded across the room, chasing his own tail. The message was unmistakable. There was still work to be done. That night the temperature plummeted unexpectedly. By morning, clouds gathered with a density that warned of another storm, heavier than the last. Rowan considered reinforcing the barn doors, but before he could begin, the distant crack of a power line snapping fractured the silence. Within an hour, snow descended in blinding sheets. Visibility narrowed to mere feet. Rowan secured the cabin and settled inside with both dogs close. The storm roared with an intensity that made the walls groan. A knock sounded against the door, urgent, frantic. Rowan opened it to find Sheriff Boone half buried in snow, breath ragged. "Eloan didn't make it home from the library," he said. "Her truck's stuck near the North Ridge. We can't get vehicles through." The word struck Rowan with unsettling force. "I need Kestrel," Boone added. "And you." Rowan glanced at his aging companion. Kestrel was already on his feet, posture alert despite the stiffness in his joints. Frost barked once, sharp and insistent, as if refusing exclusion. "The pup stays," Boone began. "No," Rowan interrupted quietly. "He follows." There was no time for argument. The storm swallowed them almost immediately. Snow lashed at their faces, erasing tracks within seconds. Kestrel led, nose low, moving with deliberate precision, honed by years of service. Rowan followed closely, one hand gripping the leash, the other shielding his eyes. Frost bounded at their flank, imitating every adjustment, every pause. Wind howled like something alive. They reached the abandoned truck first, its hazard lights flickering weakly beneath accumulating snow. No sign of Eloan inside. Kestrel circled once, then veered toward a cluster of pines barely visible through the whiteout. Rowan's pulse hammered, but he trusted the dog's instinct. Frost stumbled once in a drift nearly taller than himself, then scrambled out with fierce determination, refusing to lag. 50 yards beyond the truck, Kestrel froze, ears erect. A faint shape lay half-covered against the base of a tree. Rowan fell to his knees beside her. Eloan's face was pale, lashes crusted with ice, breath shallow but present. Relief threatened to overwhelm him, but training anchored his movements. He checked her pulse, wrapped her in his coat, and signaled Boone through the storm's chaos. "Can you carry her?" the sheriff shouted. Rowan nodded, lifting Eloan carefully against his chest. Frost darted anxiously at his heels, while Kestrel resumed position ahead, carving a path back through the obliterated landscape. Halfway to the truck, Kestrel faltered. Rowan saw it before he felt it. The slight misstep, the hesitation masked by pride. The older dog pushed forward regardless, but his gait betrayed strain. "Kestrel," Rowan called. The dog continued, determined. They reached the vehicle at last. Boone helped settle Eloan inside, covering her with blankets scavenged from the back seat. Rowan turned just as Kestrel's legs buckled. Time slowed. The Malinois did not collapse dramatically. He simply sank into the snow, chest heaving, eyes still fixed on Rowan. Rowan dropped beside him, ignoring the storm's fury. "Stay with me," he urged, voice raw. Frost pressed against Kestrel's side, small body radiating warmth in instinctive mimicry of what had once saved him. Kestrel's breathing steadied gradually beneath the combined shelter of their bodies. The storm raged, but in that narrow circle of shared heat, something unspoken passed between them, a completion rather than an ending. With Boone's help, Rowan carried both Eloan and Kestrel into the truck. Frost climbed in last, refusing to be lifted. Back at the cabin, hours blurred into cautious tending. Eloan regained consciousness near dusk, confusion yielding to recognition when she saw Rowan seated beside her. She attempted to speak, but he silenced her gently. "You're safe," he said. The words, once foreign, came easily now. Kestrel lay near the hearth, exhausted yet alive. Frost curled against him protectively, as though repaying a debt etched into instinct. When Sheriff Boone returned the following morning with news that the storm had passed and power was slowly being restored, his tone had shifted. "Town owes you," he said simply. Rowan shook his head. "No." Boone studied him for a moment before nodding. "Maybe not, but it's different now." After he left, silence settled again, but it felt altered, less oppressive, more intentional. Eloan sat wrapped in a blanket near the fire, watching Frost attempt to mimic Kestrel's composed posture. Rowan knelt beside the older dog, hand resting over the steady rhythm beneath fur that had grayed further overnight. "You did enough," he whispered. Kestrel's eyes closed, not in surrender, but in rest. Outside, sunlight fractured across snow newly sculpted by wind. The world looked stripped yet luminous, as if hardship had polished it into clarity. Rowan stepped onto the porch later that afternoon, Frost trotting confidently at his side. The air still carried winter's edge, but beneath it lay the faintest promise of change. He realized then that rescue had never been a single act performed in a storm. It had been this: staying when leaving was easier, trusting when silence felt safer, allowing warmth to return despite the risk of loss. Frost leaned against his leg, tail wagging with unguarded faith. Rowan rested a hand on the puppy's head and glanced back through the open door, where Alohan's laughter, soft but certain, mingled with the crackle of fire and Kestrel's steady breathing. The winter had not ended, but something within him had thawed irrevocably, and as he stood there, watching the light shift across the white horizon, Rowan understood that some lives are not saved in a single moment of heroism. They are saved in the quiet decision to remain. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The hush that follows survival, the fragile beginning of belonging. And perhaps this is where the truest stories begin, not in abandonment, but in the choice to answer it.